This is the Murder at Oldfields crime reenactment with Anton Giesler, the farmhand. I leave noticeable footprints all along the front porch of the house and sneak inside the farmhouse, leaving the door wide open. I notice the dog and go for it because I know he will give away my position. I get the dog and bring it back outside and put it inside the workshop, which is not far from the farmhouse. I open the door and notice several tools inside that I could use, an axe and a hammer. I put each in one hand and close the doors quietly, leaving the dog inside. I make my way back to the farmhouse and enter into the front room. I sneak up on Mr. and Mrs. Smith and hit Alexander first in the head. His chair falls backwards and his feet land in the fire. He has wounds all over his head and there's blood splatter everywhere. I hit Mrs. Smith in the back of the head and she falls forward, her chair falling sideways. I hit her in the back multiple times and I hit Alexander again in the ear. I hit them until they're beyond dead and make sure that Mr. Smith's feet are in the fire. I go and look for expensive things, including money, and the rest of the farmhouse. I head to the parlor. I drop the bloody hammer into the parlor and never return to grab it. I look around the parlor carefully, trying to locate any money or anything valuable at all. I notice nothing. I head to the east room and come upon the money chest. I accidentally cut my knee with the axe and dripped blood on the floor and on the money chest itself.
I gotta get out of here.
I decide that it's time to go, so I throw the axe out of the window and create a big gap. I jump out of the window backwards, leaving a footprint facing forward on the cellar door, and I leave the bloody axe in the house behind.
We are at the Smith house. It is November 14th,
1842.
And here we are outside. It's a cloudy day. Now let's investigate. So we have the workshop, the shed. The doors are closed. It's stuck a little bit. Oh no, the dog! Hi, dog! That's weird. He's never outside. All right, let's go inside. So we have 5 clear footprint marks heading inside to the house. Now let's go inside. The door's open. And here's the front room. You can see the 2 chairs are knocked over. In the front room we can see Mr. and Mrs. Smith are dead. Here we have Mr. Smith lying face up. His legs have been burned by the fireplace. He has wounds on his head and on his ear. He must have fallen out of his chair. He must have been whacked on his head. And then his legs burned in the fireplace. And we have tea over there. One is half drinking. So they must have been having tea before. We have the pool of blood. Must have gotten hit really hard to the head. And then Mrs. Smith over here has also fallen out of her chair. It looks like she was trying to stand up and then she got whacked. She's face down with fireplace, a little bit of fireplace burns, a pool of blood and some wounds on her head as well. And they're both very pale and not looking good. Okay, let's move on to the parlor. Now we can see there's a bloody hammer with a fingerprint on it. Must have been just dropped here. I guess they must have been looking for something in this room. Okay. Now let's see. Now let's make our way back into the hallway. And we're headed to the east room. Here we have the east room window. Let's see. Oh, we have the money chest with drops of blood on it, as well as on the floor. Looks like it must have been from the same thing. We also have another drop of blood on the window, and a fingerprint. And the window is smashed open. There's glass all over the ground. So here is the hair as well, and then here's the glass. Broken glass shattered on the ground. Now we're gonna take it outside. So I'm walking around the house. Aha, here we go. Here's the window, and here's where the murderer escaped. We have the broken window with the glass inside and all of the evidence there. We have a footprint, looks like a right footprint. Maybe he climbed out backwards. And we have the bloody axe. So he must have thrown that to smash the window. And then he must have just escaped this way. Hello, my name is Detective Sophia Guastucci, and today it is Monday, November 14th, 1842. It is 1:10 p.m., and I will be conducting an interview for the murder at Oldfields case with suspect number 1, Anton Giesler. All right, let's start with the questions. Anton, how do you know the Smiths?
Well, I know the Smiths because I've worked on the Smith farm for some time now.
Okay. How long have you been working for the Smiths?
Prior to the murders, probably a little over 2 weeks, yeah.
Okay. What type of work do you do at the farm?
Well, you see, I'm the new farmhand on the Smith farm, and I work doing normal farmhand things, mending fences, fixing the barn, you know.
What was your relationship with Mr. Smith?
It was all right. I mean, I only speak German, and the other farmhand, he was more of a veteran farmhand named Henry Bauer. He translated what I would say to Mr. Smith just so we could get along a little bit easier, but Mr. Smith would often mock me for not being able to speak English.
Okay. Did you have any complications with Mr. Smith?
Yes, I would say a few complications. Apart from Mr. Smith mocking me for not being able to speak English that well, Mr. Smith was reluctant in paying me for my work when I was there and after we had afternoon tea the night of the murders.
Mocking? Okay. What was your original name? Was it Anton Giesler or a different name?
No, you see, I changed my name. My original name was Stephen Keon.
Why did you change your name?
A little bit of a funny story there. I changed my name because I was in the German army and I feared I would be taken as a prisoner of war. So I changed my name and came into the United States.
All right. Now, where did you stay? Where's your bedroom?
Well, the farmhouse had 2 levels, and so I would sleep in the upstairs room on the 2nd floor, in a similar area to Mary and Abbott.
Mary. Okay. What are your relationships with the other victims?
I worked alongside Henry because he was also a veteran farmhand, and I've known him for about the 2 weeks that I've been here. Henry would translate to what I said, like I said, to Mr. Smith in English. He and I were friendly with each other, but I don't know, we had a similar brotherly relationship. But I also know Marian Abbott since she worked on the farm too. She stayed more in the farmhouse tending to the old couple.
All right. Next question. What were you doing on the day of the murders?
Well, I worked on the farm, my normal chores, and then I went to the Sunday afternoon tea with the Smiths and Henry Bauer.
So the Sunday tea.
Yep.
And where were you when the murders took place?
After the tea, I left the farm and never came back.
Never came back?
Yeah, I had gotten my pay.
All right. Do you have any wounds?
Yes, as you can see, my pants were torn at the knee and my knee is scraped and a little bloody. I also hurt my finger, but these were just casual farmhand injuries.
So you got them at the farm?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have a reason? Did you have a reason to murder the Smiths?
Of course not. No, they were an innocent couple. I mean, Mr. Smith and I, we argued here and there, and it was more playful, really. I wouldn't have a reason to murder the Smiths.
Okay. Thank you, Anton.
Hello, I'm Detective Reagan Thompson. Today is Monday, November 14th, 1842 at 2:15. I am here interviewing suspect number 2 for the murder at Old Fields case. With me today is Henry Bauer. Do you have an alibi, Mr. Bauer? If so, what is it?
Yes, I do. After I had tea with the Smiths on Sunday afternoon, I returned back to my cottage on the farm.
Did you commit the murders of Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
No, I did not.
Where were you the night of the murders?
I was in my cottage. That's where I stayed for the night.
What was your relationship like with the victims?
Well, we had a good relationship. I was the farmhand for Mr. Smith. I had been the veteran farmhand for a long time, and he treated me just fine. He always paid me on time, and we never had any complications. And as well for Mrs. Smith, we had a good relationship.
Did you respect each other? Was there respectability going on between you and your employers?
Yes, there was mutual respect.
Mr. Bauer, could you please describe to me what a typical day working on the farm was like?
Well, I was the farmhand, so I would do all farm things like feed the hogs, mend the fences, all sorts of things like that. Just working around with farm tools.
Thank you for that. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Germany.
Germany. Same as Anton?
Yes.
The other farmhand? Okay, thank you.
But I can speak English too.
Thank you for that. What was your relationship like with the other people on the farm?
We had a good relationship. I would say I really only talked to Anton. I was the translator for him and Mr. Smith because Anton couldn't speak English, so I would translate what he said to Mr. Smith, and we all got along well.
What would you say you do for a living, specifically?
Well, I'm a farmhand.
Can you please explain to me what you were doing the night or the afternoon or the days of the murders?
Well, I had tea with the Smiths in their front room, and then I returned to my cottage on the farm property. That night, I stayed there. I didn't see anything suspicious happen. I just minded my own business.
Okay, so nothing suspicious. Do you know anyone who would want to murder Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, the only person questionable would be Anton because Mr. Smith mocked him, but I wouldn't think that would cause him to murder the Smiths.
Anton was mocked for what?
For not being able to speak English, detective.
Did you happen to know where Mr. Smith kept his stash of money?
No, I did not know where he kept it.
When you left the farm last, what did it look like?
Well, I think it looked pretty usual. The door to the workshop was closed, but it wasn't locked. And the Smiths were sitting in their front room chairs in their front room when I left. I mean, they sit there pretty often. There was nothing really suspicious or anything. And the Smiths never kept their dog in the shed, though, so that was a little funny when they found the dog in there.
Okay, thank you. So you would say when you left the farm after the tea, the farmhouse looked completely normal, just normal day?
Yes. And also, well, I didn't know the dog was in there until afterwards, but I did know the door was closed. I saw the door closed.
Okay, so just to clarify with that question, the shed door was closed, but the dog was not yet in the shed?
I don't believe so.
Like he was found. Okay, thank you for that. Did you frequently talk with any of the other suspects?
Only Anton, when I would translate what he said to Mr. Smith, but I think that's it. I mean, I knew the other suspects. We didn't really talk, though.
Never really had a reason to, would you say, or you didn't get along, or?
Just didn't cross paths.
Okay, thank you for that. That will be our last question for this interview. Thank you, Henry. Hello, I'm Detective Reagan Thompson. Today is Monday, November 14th, 1842. The time is 305. I am here with suspect number 3. Mary Ann Abbott is here with me today. So, let's get started with these questions. Do you have an alibi? If so, what is it?
Yes, I do. On Saturday night, I left the farmhouse to go spend time with my mother, and I did not return until Monday, which was after the murders took place.
Okay, mother. Okay, what was your relationship with the two victims, Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
Well, I was Mrs. Smith's niece. I am her niece. I had a good relationship with them both, and I was also a household help for the Smiths, so they both treated me nice.
Okay, sounds good. So, what would you describe your typical day like at the Smith farmhouse?
Well, I would do household chores. I would cook, clean, do laundry, fix tea, and I also took care of the elderly couple at the farm.
Okay, thank you. Can you please explain what you were doing the night of the murders?
The night of the murders, I was at my mother's house spending time with her.
So, what would you say your job is for a living?
Well, I'm a household help for the Smiths. I do chores around the farm, and I take care of the elderly couple, as I said.
You would say you would assist them?
Yes.
Daily tasks? Okay. And Miss Abbott, where are you from?
I am from New York.
What did the farm look like when you left it last?
It looked the way as it was before. Everything was in its place. Nothing really suspicious to me.
Nothing was out of place.
Nope.
Do you know anyone who would want to murder Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
No, I don't think so, but Anton had a few complications with him. Mr. Smith would mock him for not being able to speak English, but that's about it.
Anton and mocking. What was your relationship like with the other members of the farm?
Well, I didn't really know the others except for Anton because we both lived in the upstairs of the Smith farmhouse, and we talked occasionally. We were pretty nice friends, but not too close.
Okay, got it. Could you please describe the sleeping situation and arrangements in the farmhouse?
Yes, Detective. Mr. and Mrs. Smith slept downstairs, and me and Anton both slept upstairs in separate rooms.
Okay, did Mr. and Mrs. Smith sleep in separate rooms?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Could you add anything about the boots we found?
I believe so.
Alright, can you tell me and describe to me what was significant about this pair of boots?
Well, Mr. Smith brought the boots into town for Anton on the final day of Anton's work before he left the farm.
Were you paid for your efforts and assistance with the elderly couple at all?
No, I was not paid.
Did you know where Mr. Smith kept the stash of money?
Yes, I was aware. He kept it in the east room, under the window, in the chest.
The money chest, you
Yes.
say? Okay. Were you satisfied with your care here?
Yes, they treated me well.
Would you frequently talk with any of the other suspects?
I wouldn't say so, except for Anton when I saw him, as we both slept upstairs, in separate rooms.
Thank you. This concludes our interview with Mary Ann Abbott.
Hello, this is Detective Sophia Guastucci, and today, November 14th, 1842, on this Monday, it is now 3:40 p.m., and I will be conducting an interview with suspect number 4, Francis Curran. Francis, how do you know the Smiths?
Well, I know the Smiths because I passed by their farm on my way to other farms for my work.
How long have you been in Oldfields for?
I've been practicing my trade in Oldfields for about 3 years now.
3 years? How often do you come to the Smith farm?
Relatively often, usually on weekends, typically on Saturdays and Sundays in the early afternoon.
Okay. Do you have a close relationship with Mr. Smith?
Not necessarily. I mean, I know Mr. Smith because I passed by his farm and sell him some stuff for my cart. We're pretty friendly with each other, but not super close.
All right. So what type of work do you do?
I'm a peddler in the area. I travel from farm to farm selling goods and supplies for my horse-drawn cart.
All right. Now, what exactly were you doing on the day of the murders?
Well, I was traveling to another farm to sell goods and supplies for my horse-drawn cart.
So where were you when the murders took place?
I was en route to another farm at the time of these murders.
En route?
Yes.
Was there anything suspicious when you passed by?
Well, when I passed by, I didn't notice anything super suspicious about the farmhouse.
But you weren't there when the murders happened?
No, I just passed by.
You passed by after or before?
Couldn't really tell. I think it was before.
Okay.
Earlier afternoon.
Do you have a reason to have murdered the Smiths?
No, no reason at all to murder the Smiths.
What do you know about any of the suspects?
I don't know much about the other suspects. I know Henry, Anton, and Mary just by passing by the farm, but we don't have super close relationships.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Detective Reagan Thompson. Today is Monday, November 14th, 1842. At 4:25 in the afternoon, I am here with suspect number 5, George Weeks. George, do you have an alibi? If so, what is it?
Yes, I do. I was not at the farm when the murders took place. I was at my house, which was off the farm, because I don't work on the weekends, so I went home.
Where were you headed when you noticed something was suspicious about the Oldfields farm?
Well, I was headed to the farm. It was Monday morning, and I was headed to return to work.
Did you commit the murders of Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
No, I would never.
When you arrived at the farm, where was the dog?
The dog was in the workshop. The door was closed. It wasn't locked, but it was pretty stuck closed, and the dog's usually not in there. The Smiths used to always bring it inside at night.
What do you do for a living?
I'm one of the farm hands as well. I'm not a main one like Anton and Henry, but I still do farm work.
So, you would say that because you don't work weekends, you're not one of the main farm hands of this farm?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, detective.
What was your relationship like with the other people on the farm?
Well, I knew the other farm hands pretty well. I didn't really ever talk to anyone too much. I knew Mr. Smith, I worked for him, and Mrs. Smith, she treated me well. And the servant girl, she was usually in the farmhouse. We didn't really talk too much, but she seems nice.
Who is this servant girl that you talk of?
Well, Mary Ann Abbott, because she does household help around the farmhouse, and she doesn't get paid, so that's why I call her that.
You weren't aware that they were family members to each other?
Who?
Mary and Mrs. Smith.
Oh, no.
What time did you typically leave and return to the farm for a day's work?
Well, I would leave in the evening, and I would return the next day around sunrise.
Early morning?
So I was there pretty much all day.
Okay. How far was your house from the Smith farm?
It was about a mile. Or it is about a mile.
Okay, thank you. When you first approached the house on Monday morning, what did you notice?
Well, the front door to the house was open. The workshop door was closed, like it normally is. But the dog was in there. He's usually not. And there was a mark on the cellar door with footprints. So someone must have climbed out the window. And then, the door to the workshop was closed, not locked though, but it was stuck.
Okay, so this was peculiar, out of order, not a normal situation.
Yes.
Okay.
As I said, the dog was usually inside also.
Yes. Did you frequently visit this farm?
Yes. Well, I worked there, detective.
Right.
Just not on the weekends.
Okay. Did you frequently talk to any of our other suspects, Mary, Henry?
Well, I would talk to the farmhands every once in a while. Maybe had a few conversations, I'd say. But I've seen the servant around, but we haven't really talked.
Do any of the other suspects seem suspicious to have murdered or have any complications with the Smiths?
No, I don't think so. There was some talk about Mr. Smith mocking Anton for not speaking English, I believe, but I didn't really know too much information.
Thank you for your time. We have one more question here. Do you have a reason to murder the Smiths at all?
No. I like the Smiths. They treat me nice. They paid me for my work, and, I appreciate them.
Hello, this is Detective Sophia Guastucci again. Today it is Tuesday, November 15th, 1842, and it is 10 o'clock in the morning. I will now be conducting an interrogation with suspect number 1 of the murder at Oldfields case, Anton Giesler. All right, Anton, are you aware of your Miranda rights?
No, Detective.
Okay, so your Miranda rights are that you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in the court of law. You also have the right to an attorney, and if you cannot afford one, then one will be provided for you. Do you understand?
Yes,
Are you ready to proceed?
I am.
Okay. So, what is your alibi?
Well, after having afternoon tea on Sunday with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I was paid for my month of work on the farm, and then I left.
Why did you leave?
I left because my month of work was done, and Mr. Smith also paid me for that month, and it was just time for me to go.
Were you planning on returning?
No, I was not.
Okay. Did you have a good relationship with the victims?
Yes, I was treated well by Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I did get mocked by Mr. Smith often for not being able to speak English too well, but fortunately Henry Bauer, the other veteran farmhand at the Oldfields farm, often translated for me between me and Mr. Smith.
All right. Now, as a farmhand, did you have access to tools in the workshop?
Yes, I was allowed to use some of the tools in the workshop. It was often unlocked. There was no lock on it. I mean, the door stuck a little bit, so it was a little tough to pull open, but it was never locked, and I constantly had access to what was inside the workshop.
Okay. Now, what tools did you use the most for your work?
For my work as a farmhand at Oldfields, I often use the hammer and the shovel.
What exactly did you use these tools for?
Just normal, regular farmhand things. I mean, I would hammer nails into the broken fence. I would shovel up old crops. Just normal things you would use a hammer and a shovel for.
All right. Did you take any tools out of the workshop on the day of the murders?
Yes, it being my last day of work, I did use the hammer and the shovel and some other various tools that were inside the workshop. Can't really put my mind to what they were, but I definitely used the hammer and the shovel.
What did you use the hammer for?
Like I mentioned, I had to fix some things with the fence. There was a couple of gaps in the barn that I had to nail new boards to, and I think the trough for the pigs was broken, so I had to fix that too with the hammer.
Thank you. How long have you been in the United States for?
Just a few months. I arrived in Ellis Island, New York, July 1st.
That's right. And you said you were from Germany, so what barriers did you face coming here?
Well, he said that Mr. Smith, I was mocked by Mr. Smith, and
Right.
So that was definitely a barrier for me. It was tough to communicate with my employer, and it was just frustrating for me to work every day and have to come in contact with someone who would make fun of me for something so little as just not being able to communicate.
Right. So it seems as if everyone else has said that they were aware that Mr. Smith mocked you for not being able to speak English, and no one else has had any complications with him other than you. So did you really have a good relationship with him, and what makes you so innocent?
Well, Detective, that is a tough question. We didn't really argue. It wasn't that much of a difference between us. Pretty much just the mocking really got to me, but there was no intention of mine to hurt Mr. Smith or his family. And the reason that I would be innocent is because he paid me well. I lived in the farmhouse. I had good company. The other farmhand was also from Germany. We didn't talk too much. He often just translated for me, but it was nice to know someone from my home country.
So there was never really a reason for me to murder anyone. I mean, the mocking did get under my skin a little bit, but that's not enough to kill a man.
So, who, according to you, would you say would have been the most likely to have killed them?
Well,
Or do you not know?
I don't know, honestly. If I had to pick someone, it would definitely be Mary. She was with the couple all the time, constantly tending to their needs. She cared for them. They were old in age. I don't know their relationship too well, but I know she wasn't paid.
Mary was Mrs. Smith's niece.
Oh, she was the niece. Okay. You know, she just seemed to me more like a servant girl, just doing work around the house, taking care of the elderly couple. I didn't know that.
All right. Now, were you aware Mr. Smith was a wealthy man?
No, I was not aware of this. I knew he was well off, but I didn't know he was considered wealthy.
So you didn't know where he kept his money?
No, not at all.
Okay. Now, was there a conflict with you and Mr. Smith the last time you saw him?
You mean the afternoon after the Sunday tea?
Yes.
Yes, we
During
did have
the tea.
during the tea. We did have a little bit of a conflict. Mr. Smith did not want to pay me for my month of agreed work on the farm, but he eventually gave me my compensation for what I had done. He also gave me a nice pair of boots, which was very generous of him.
Why did he give you the boots?
I'm not exactly sure why he gave me the boots. There was no mention of it previously. There was nothing written down that that was what he would be giving me at the end of the month. I do know that he got them from the town nearby, but I'm not sure the purpose of his purchase.
All right, we're almost done here. So where exactly did you go after the tea?
After the tea, I left the farm promptly, and I was going to go search for work elsewhere, at possibly another farm or a neighboring field. And I came to rest at this man's barn. I didn't know the man too well, but he offered me a night to stay at his barn.
All right, Anton. And last question. So you say that Mr. Smith mocking you is not a reason for you to commit the murders, but we have searched the crime scene far and low, and we have found lots of evidence that has matched to your DNA and matched to you. So what do you have to say about this?
Well, as I said before, Detective, I lived in the farmhouse with the couple, so it makes sense for my evidence to be there, or whatever you would find, hair, shoe prints, everything. I frequently was in there because I lived there and I would walk around. Also, I believe that I had to mend some things around the house, maybe a window or a door at some point, so if you find anything about that, I often touch the outside of the house, just fixing it for the elderly couple.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anton. This concludes our interrogation.
Hello, I am Detective Reagan Thompson. Today is Tuesday, November 15th, 1842 at 11:30 a.m. I'm here with our first suspect of the murder at Oldfields case for an interrogation session. His name is Anton Giesler. Anton, are you aware of your Miranda rights?
No, I am not, Detective.
Okay. Under the Miranda rights, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Additionally, under these rights, you have the right to an attorney. If you are unable to afford one, one will be provided to you by the court. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay. Anton, please describe to me what your alibi is for this case.
Well, Detective, on Sunday afternoon, I was having tea with Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Henry Bauer in the front room of the Smith farmhouse. We had tea, and once Mr. Smith paid me for my work, I left the farm.
Okay, thank you. When did you arrive in the United States?
Well, I arrived in Ellis Island in New York on July 1st, 1842. I came for a new opportunity.
Thank you, Anton. This will lead me to my next question. Why did you start working for Mr. Smith?
Well, I came to the U.S. from Germany out of fear of being taken as a prisoner of war. And I was also told there was farm work on Long Island, so I headed east until I found the Smith farm, and I was told there was work there.
All right. Did you have any conflicts working with Mr. Smith?
Well, it was hard to communicate because I don't speak English, and Mr. Smith doesn't understand German, so I would have Henry Bauer, the other farmhand, translate for me, but it was a little difficult, but I wouldn't say we had a bad relationship at all.
Okay, thank you.
you. So you did not have that much exposure to speaking English in Germany?
No, I don't know how to speak English.
Okay, and you haven't lived here long enough to understand much either?
I've lived here for about a few months now.
Okay, thank you. With this
Well,
language...
actually, sorry, detective. I've been here since July, but I don't know English.
Okay, thank you. So with this language barrier, did you get frustrated or have difficulty communicating with Mr. Smith?
Yes, as I said, it was difficult to communicate with him. I mean, we tried to make it work, but sometimes I would get a little bit frustrated.
Okay, thank you. So do you think this frustration was ever enough to lash out or hurt anybody?
No, I would not say that. It was never that big of a deal. We would make it work, and we would have Henry, translate what I said, so he would always understand me eventually. It was just a little bit harder than normal.
Did this fuel any anger inside of you?
No.
So before you mentioned that you left the farm after the tea, where did you go after the tea? Did you leave the farm completely, or can you describe to me what happened after?
Well, I left the farm because I had gotten paid, and I wandered down the road, I think about a few cities over, and it was getting late, so I found another barn, and that's where I stayed there that night.
Another barn, you say. So do you know whose barn this was? Did you know the owner of the farm?
It was a man. I didn't know him, but I saw him, and he saw me, and he offered for me to sleep there, which was very nice.
Okay. Now, why did you leave the Old Fields farm in the first place?
Well, as I said, I had gotten my pay, and I was pretty much thinking I would find some work elsewhere, but I hadn't fully committed to that, but I was looking for more experience and definitely a higher pay.
Okay, higher pay. Were you unsatisfied with your pay?
Well, Mr. Smith was a little bit reluctant to pay me for my month's pay, the $4, but he eventually did, so.
Now, were you aware that Mr. Smith was a wealthy man?
No.
Not aware. Thank you. You said you talked with Henry and you lived on the same floor as Mary in the farmhouse. Are you close with Francis at all?
No, I only see Francis as he passes by the farm sometimes. He's a peddler, so he travels, he travels through Old Fields to other communities where he does his trade, but I don't really know him.
So to him, he only is a peddler?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, thank you. At the tea on the Sunday afternoon, did you have any issues with Mr. Smith?
Well, he did hesitate to pay me at first, but he eventually did, and that's all. I mean, we were just there to talk, have some tea, and I was there to get my pay, which I did, so then I left.
Okay, thank you. Now, when you were found at the other barn, when you just spent the night trying to find new work, it was noticed that you have a scrape on your knee, and a tear in your pants. Can you describe to me how this happened, how you got those?
Well, I got the rip in my pants from doing farm work at the Smith farm.
Okay. What exactly were you doing?
Well, I was fixing a broken fence, and there was a nail. I was trying to hammer it in, and my pants got stuck on the nail. So then they ripped, and then my knee got scraped.
All right. And you got scraped while you're doing this farm work?
Yes.
Typical day. Okay, thank you. It was also noticed that you wore some pretty nice and new boots. This was not typical for a normal farmhand. Would you say yes to that? These are not normal shoes for a farmhand?
They were pretty nice, yes.
Okay. Can you tell me where you got these boots?
Well, Mr. Smith gave them to me.
Okay. Do you have any reason to believe why he gave these boots to you?
Well, I think he bought them for himself. I'm not quite sure, but I think he just gave them to me as a bonus for my pay, doing good work, and as I said, he was reluctant to pay me, so maybe he felt bad, but it was really nice of him.
Okay, thank you, Anton. That will conclude our questions for this interrogation. Thank you.
Hello, this is Sophia Guastucci. I am an expert witness in fingerprints. I have a master's degree in criminology from the University of Maryland, and I've been studying criminology ever since I was in high school. I've taken honors forensics classes, and I've taken and passed classes in fingerprint analysis, latent fingerprinting, trace evidence, and physical evidence also. I have been working as a fingerprint analyst for the Maryland Police Department for 7 years. I study, evaluate, and preserve fingerprints that were found at crime scenes. And I also work closely with the fingerprint technician who reconstructs the circumstances surrounding a crime scene in order to determine what really happened. Today I will be showing you 6 sets of fingerprints that were found at the crime scene alongside the fingerprints taken from the suspects. Alright, so let's start off with Henry Bauer. So here we have Henry Bauer's fingerprint from his left index finger, and it is an ulnar loop because the loop of his left hand opens toward the pinky. And here we will be comparing it to evidence V1, the fingerprints on the hammer that were collected from the crime scene. So we can see that I have circled minutia here. And let's start off with these red circles. So the red circles are bifurcations or forks. We have 1, 2, 3 that I have circled, which are the ones that stood out to me. And this is from Henry Bauer's fingerprint. And we can see that in the same spots at the top here, bifurcations and one in the middle right here, they appear to be the same. Now with the blue circles right here, they are also in the same spots on the evidence from the crime scene. And this is also a blue circle right here. This one is blue. And so these are ridge endings. The yellow circles right here, this yellow circle, that is just the delta. And then the yellow arrow here is pointing to the core. And then this green dot, the green circles are dots. We have 3 there. And then we have 1, 2, 3. So you can see that all of these minutia are in the same spots. So since the control from Henry Bauer and the evidence found at the crime scene have the same classification, the ulnar loop, you can see that all of the loops are facing the same way, and we can see that there's substantial matching minutia and ridge characteristics. This means that the control and the evidence are comparable. Okay, so next we have Anton Giesler's fingerprint. This is from his left index finger, and it is a radial loop because the loop, which is of his left hand, opens towards the thumb. And we are comparing it to evidence V2, the fingerprints on the hammer that were collected at the crime scene. So we can see here that all of my circles are colored. I have circled the minutia. And so these red circles here are bifurcations or forks. This is from Anton Giesler. And then this is from the evidence at the crime scene. We can see that they are in the same spot. Same here for the blue, the ridge endings. They are also in the same spots on the evidence from the crime scene. We can see here that the core is in the same place. And there's also a delta here. However, there's no delta in the evidence collected from the crime scene because that part is cut off. But that does not mean that the fingerprints are not from the same person, because we can see here there are also more minutia that match, such as these orange circles, which are short ridges, and this yellow circle here, which is also a bridge. So since we have the same minutia in the same spots, and although this delta here is not shown, everything else matches, so this leads me to believe that the control and the evidence of these two are also comparable. Next, we have a fingerprint from Mary Ann Abbott. This is the control, and it is her left thumb. It's a radial loop because the loop of her left hand opens towards the thumb. And then here is evidence W. It's a fingerprint from the teacup of the front room in the Smith house. So here we can see that these red circles are short ridges, and they are in a line at the top of the fingerprint, which match right here from the evidence at the crime scene. The green circles I have circled are dots. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I have circled from Mary Ann Abbott's finger. which match the fingerprint from the teacup. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here is the core of the fingerprints. You can see the loop is going the same way. And then we have the ridge endings in the blue. You can see that the ridges are ending, and these are also in the same spots. Now again, I've just circled some of the minutia, but this is a substantial enough amount. It is more than 8 to be able to be in testimony at a trial. So we can conclude, because they have the same classification and minutia, that these two, the control from Mary Ann Abbott and the evidence W at the crime scene, are comparable. And here we have Anton Giesler again. I have just done a little bit of a different format here to show you that these this is the control of Anton, and this is evidence X, and I will be showing you that they are comparable. So we have Anton's left thumb. It is a radial loop because the loop opens toward the thumb. And here we have evidence X, which is a fingerprint on the east room window that was collected from the crime scene. Now I have numbered the minutia. So number 1 is a scar. Right here, there's this white line of space, which means that there was a scar on his fingerprint, which matches here. Number 2 is a bifurcation or a fork. So right here we can see that there is a bifurcation, as well as right here. Number 3, we have a hook. So this right here, there's a hook coming off of the black line, same as right here. And then number 4, we have a dot. This is just one of the dots that there are. And on the evidence X, we have a dot right here in the same spot. Now number 5, a short ridge. So here we have the short ridge right here, and same place. Here we have a short ridge. Number 6, we have a fork. So this right here, there's a fork coming off the center right here, and the same right here. This line right here is a fork. And number 7, there's a bridge connecting the two black lines. And on evidence X, there's also a bridge. Number 8, we have a hook. There's also a hook, so it's a little black line coming off right here. Same as on evidence X, right here we have a hook. And 9, a short ridge. So here we have another short ridge just near the middle, right here. This circle right here. And then on evidence X, we have another short ridge right here. And then here are the cores. They are in the same spots. You can see the loop is going the same direction. Now we can't technically see very clearly the deltas, but this is just a portion of the fingerprint, so that means that it was just cut off. But because of all of this matching minutia and the same classification, we can tell that Anton Giesler's fingerprint is comparable to evidence X from the crime scene. Now we have a control of Alexander Smith's fingerprint. This is his left index finger, and it's a plain whirl because here in the yellow, I have circled 2 deltas, and the deltas, if you make a line, they cross the center of the fingerprint. So that means it's a plain whirl. And over here, here are the 2 deltas. So this means that the evidence Y, the fingerprint on the workshop door, is also a plain whirl. And I will be showing the matching minutia that I have found on both of these. So the red circles are right here. These are short ridges on the control of Alexander Smith. They are also found on evidence Y in the same spots, right here and right here. Now these green circles are dots. They are also found in the same spot, the side, the top, the side, and the top. And then we have these blue circles, which are ridge endings. And as you can see, they're also two on top of each other, two on top of each other. And that is all the minutia I have circled for this fingerprint. You can also see there is a scar here. And since we have the same classification and matching minutia, I can conclude that the control of Alexander Smith is comparable to evidence Y, the fingerprint on the workshop door from the crime scene. And lastly, we have the control of Alexander Smith's fingerprint. This is from his left thumb, and it's a double loop whorl because there are two loops combined into one point, so there's an S shape made here. And the same with the evidence Z, the fingerprint on the money chest in the east room. There's also an S shape here. So to start off with the minutia, the red circles are short ridges. We have one at the top here, two on the side, and for the evidence Z, we have one at the top here and two on the side. The blue circles right here are ridge endings, and on evidence Z, we also have two circled ridge endings. These green circles are dots. We have 4 dots here on the control and 4 dots here on evidence Z. We also have an orange circle of a bridge and an orange circle of a bridge in the same spots. And here we can see the core on the control and on the evidence. And we can see the 2 deltas. They are in the same spots on both the control and the evidence. So because they both of these fingerprints are double loop whorls, so they're the same classification, and we can see that all of the minutia are in the same spots. When you look at it, it appears to be in the exact same spots. So we can conclude, because of the same classification and the substantial matching minutia, it is over 8, and to take this to court you need at least 8. So that means that these 2 fingerprints, the control of the left thumb of Alexander Smith and evidence Z, the fingerprint on the money chest in the Smith house, are comparable. Thank you, and again, this is licensed fingerprint expert witness Sophia Guastucci.
Hello everyone, I am Reagan Thompson, a licensed blood and DNA specialist. I have a master's degree in the criminal science from Harvard University. I've been working for the Chicago Police Department for 25 years, and I have passed all specialty courses on blood typing analysis, blood splatter analysis, and all DNA courses offered. I also worked with the medical examiner when he performs autopsies of the cases I'm working on and shadow the crime scene investigators. My credentials are top of the line. I have had experience with this type of work for over 20 years, and I have no doubt that my expertise will not fail in this case. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, today I will be talking about the DNA found at the Murder at Oldfields crime scene. Today is November 30th, 1842. The time is 10 in the morning. We're going to start with this. In this first photo, we have evidence number A. It is blood pool A found in the crime scene beneath Alexander Smith's head. He was the victim. This is the control taken from Alexander. We can see that by using a very high-tech method called gel electrophoresis, the fragmentation of DNA is very similar between these two, and you could say that they are quite comparable, if not an exact match. Based off of the gel electrophoresis, we can notice that there's one skinny little rectangle and then a larger rectangle beneath it, and we compare that with the control found from Alexander Smith, a small skinny rectangle above a larger square rectangle. Then we can see in both that there is this great big gap between the next set of DNA. If you can notice, it goes big, skinny, medium, medium, big, skinny, medium, medium. Again, we have this break in the chain. Then another medium one, break, medium, medium, break, medium. And therefore, blood pool A, number A, is comparable and if not an exact match to that of Alexander Smith control DNA. Moving on to the next one. Our next one is evidence B, found from blood pool B at the murder at Oldfield's crime scene. This is from beneath Rebecca Smith's victim's head. This piece of evidence B is compared to the control of Rebecca Smith. We can see by gel electrophoresis that these two are very comparable, if not the exact same, or a match. Compared to both, you can see that this is their pattern. Big break, medium rectangle, small rectangle. Big break, medium rectangle. Big break, medium rectangle. Big break, medium rectangle. Small break, small rectangle. It is the same for the control found from Rebecca Smith. Big break, medium rectangle, small rectangle. Big break, medium rectangle. Big break, medium rectangle. Big break, medium rectangle, small break, medium rectangle. This allows us to see that they are very comparable and if not a match. Moving on to the next evidence found. Our next evidence piece is evidence piece G. It's a blood drop on the east room window. It is comparable to the control DNA from Anton Giesler. Based on gel electrophoresis, we were able to see that these two are comparable if not a match. You can see based on their pattern and their structure with the rectangles and breaks that these two are in fact a match. Let's go through the pattern. Big break, medium rectangle. Small break, medium rectangle. Medium rectangle, small break. Big rectangle, medium break. Big rectangle, small rectangle. Small rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle. Big rectangle, small break. Small rectangle, medium rectangle, break. That's from the evidence found at G, the blood drop found on the east room window. This is comparable to that of the control DNA from Anton Giesler. We have big break, small rectangle, little break, small rectangle, small rectangle, small break, big rectangle, small break, big rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle, big rectangle, small break, small rectangle, big rectangle, break. These two are comparable. Let's move on to the next evidence. The next evidence found was evidence number J, the blood drops found on the east room floor. These are comparable to those of Anton Giesler. Based on gel electrophoresis, we are able to see the similarities in their complexity of the DNA between the evidence J and the control from Anton Giesler. Let's go through the patterns that are very similar and if not a match. Break, small rectangle, small break, small rectangle, small rectangle, small break, big rectangle, small break, big rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle, line, big rectangle, small break, small rectangle, and big rectangle. This is the exact same to the control found from Anton Giesler. Big break, small rectangle, small break, small rectangle, small rectangle, small break, big rectangle, small rectangle, small break, big rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle, small rectangle, and then a small line, big rectangle, small break, small rectangle, big rectangle. And therefore, they are the same. It is a match. Let's move on to our last piece of DNA evidence that we analyzed. Here we have evidence K. It's the blood drops found on the hammer. This is comparable to that of Rebecca Smith. This is how we found out that the hammer was most likely the murder weapon, because the evidence here suggests that Rebecca Smith was hit with a hammer at some point, leaving her blood on the hammer. Let's go through the patterns. Based on gel electrophoresis, we were able to discover that the patterns between the DNA found at the crime scene, evidence K, and the control from Rebecca Smith are the same. We have a big break, small rectangle, big break, small rectangle, big break, small rectangle, big break, small rectangle, small break, and then a small rectangle. That's from the evidence K. From the control, we have a big break, small rectangle, big break, small rectangle, big break, small rectangle, big break, small rectangle, small break, small rectangle. And therefore, these two are comparable and a match. This is Reagan Thompson, a licensed DNA expert. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Reagan Thompson, a licensed medical examiner in most states, including Texas, California, and New York. I've been in the medical examiner field for over 15 years and am constantly continuing my practice. I examine nearly 100 of the deceased on a yearly basis and present my conclusions in court. Today is November 25th, 1842 at 8:20 in the morning. I'm here to discuss the victim's state from the murder at Oldfields case. I saw the deceased while their bodies were lying near the fireplace in the front room and then again examined them in my lab for further investigation and examination. Mr. Smith's body was engulfed in ashes on the floor up to his femoral gradal trochanter in the lower part of his esophageum. This suggests that he was burning for a great deal of time. It can additionally be noted that Mr. Smith had several wounds to the head as well. 2 were to the right auditory meatus. Another wound was located along the lumboidal suture. At this location, the hair was forced into the head and the brain was severely wounded. The incision made here was jagged and was done by a blunt-edged tool of sorts. An additional wound was found to the parietal bone, roughly 1.5 inches in length. Due to the rough incision, it can be determined that the wound was inflicted by a similar blunt tool. Mrs. Smith's body was engulfed in ashes on the floor as well, however not nearly as severe as her partner, Mr. Smith. The overall extent of her burns were mild compared to those of Mr. Smith. The ashes reached up to the middle of her medial crest in both fibulas. Mrs. Smith also had several fatal-looking wounds located on her head area as well. There were 3 wounds that could be distinguished. One was to the frontal bone of the skull, another was to the right of the parietal bone near the coronal suture, and the last was found to the right temporal bone near the sphenoid bone. The jagged nature of all the head wounds imply that Mrs. Smith was hit with a similar blunt tool like Mr. Smith. At this time, it can be inferred that the victims, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, died of blunt force trauma to the head and their bodies burned after death. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Reagan Thompson and I will be delivering the closing statement for the prosecution side of the murder at Oldfields trial case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, by definition, homicide is the deliberate and unlawful killing of one person or persons by another. The question here is the defendant innocent of brutally murdering the innocent lives of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, or is he guilty? It is important that we remember the facts in order to stay focused and keep the case in perspective. The evidence is such that you must answer this question in the affirmative. The result is supported by not only the science of DNA and fingerprints, but also by the science of hair and blood. Let's talk about the blood evidence first. What did the expert witness have to say about that? A majority of the blood found in the house was comparable to that of the defendant. Blood found on the money chest was comparable to that of the defendant. Blood found on the front porch was comparable to that of the defendant. Blood found on the axe, the east room floor, and the east room window was all comparable to that of the defendant. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a fact. Further, the experts on fingerprints elaborated on how extensively the defendant's fingerprints littered the crime scene and were found on the murder weapon. The exemplar fingerprint from the defendant's left index finger was comparable to the fingerprint evidence found on the hammer. Both have the same radial loop classification and very similar ridge characteristics. The fingerprint evidence found on the east room window is also comparable to that of the defendant's. For both the fingerprint evidence found on the hammer and on the east room window, more than 7 matching minutiae were found. This adds to the evidence that proves the defendant guilty. It is a cold, hard fact that DNA is unique to each and every individual. Its composition is so complex that no DNA of each human, animal, or creature is the same. As confirmed by the experts in this field, it was concluded that the exemplar DNA from the defendant and the evidence found on the east room window and the east room floor are comparable. The high-tech method of analysis called gel electrophoresis is extremely accurate. This method was used to determine the DNA fragmentation of both the exemplar from the defendant and the evidence found at the crime scene. The barcode-esque nature of the DNA fragmentation was obvious in both the exemplar and the evidence found at the crime scene. They are matches. This evidence also puts the defendant at the scene of the crime. Additionally, the defendant has a clear motive to kill Mr. and Mrs. Smith. To add on, the defendant has all 3 characteristics it takes to commit a crime: motive, mean, and opportunity. It was brought up that Mr. Smith often made fun of Anton for being unable to speak English. Mr. Smith was also reluctant to give the defendant his $4 pay for the month of work he did on the farm. This was his motive of killing Mr. Smith.
The motive of killing Mrs. Smith was that the defendant could not leave any witnesses at his crime. The defendant used a hammer as his mean of killing Mr. and Mrs. Smith. He violently hit them both in the head, knocking them unconscious. This blunt force trauma is what ultimately killed the couple. The couple was home alone, sitting by the fireplace, and there was nothing stopping the defendant from hitting them because everyone else had gone home. This was the perfect opportunity for the defendant to strike because the victims were alone and vulnerable. Now, some may say that the defendant is innocent because he left the farm and there was evidence suggesting that it was someone else. He claimed that he had left the farm after the afternoon tea, yes, but never specified where he was headed next. This is quite suspicious behavior. The defendant had 7 different pieces of evidence that confirm him as the culprit. The defendant had the most pieces of evidence that linked him to the crime scene. His blood was on the axe, in the east room, on the east room window, and on the front porch. His fingerprints were on the hammer and the east room window. His hair was found at the east room window, and he had suspicious-looking footprints near the workshop door and on the cellar door outside of the east room window. There was not enough evidence to prove any of the other suspects guilty. It is now time to render judgment, ladies and gentlemen. Your job as jurors, your privilege, your duty, is to do justice. Do justice for the victims, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who were brutally slaughtered the evening of November 13th, 1842. We have proved that the defendant has a clear motive, mean, and opportunity, with supporting evidence that he murdered Mr. and Mrs. Smith. The correct verdict is guilty on the charge of homicide, the slaying of at least one human by another. Thank you.